So, don't mind the Overwatch noises in the background. It's there to add ambiance to the fact that we're reading an AMA from the design and balance team. These always happen when I don't know, and then I can't submit any questions. Even if I do submit questions, they don't give two shits. So, here we are, yada yada yada. 1 hour from this post, we'll be here to answer your questions about the Overwatch League playtest videos. They got their community team and then some hero designers. So, we'll just start going down the list and see what they say. Do you foresee any heroes changing roles, or would you like to keep everyone where they are? And we know they've been trying this with with Doomfist as tank. So we're experimenting with it, we're talking a lot about it. No hero has moved roles yet, but we started testing Doomfist as a tank. Doomfist kit is full of crowd control effects and mobility, which makes it difficult to tune and balance him as a DPS in Overwatch 2. As a tank, though, he can keep those key properties to his kit, since they fit nice into the tank role. Of course, this means he'll be losing some damage and gaining some defense. This is still being tested and iterated on. We don't have a ton of details yet, and still in the early stages. Some of the early feedback so far is that he's not really feeling like a tank without having at least one active defense button. So the way I see this, and my feelings as Doomfist on a tank, this fucking hold on. Okay. Alright. Halloween noises were a little bit too much. So Doomfist is a tank. Doomfist is this really weird thing, and we talked about it earlier in the stream where, like, do I think Doomfist is balanced? And I was like, no, he's a little bit too strong, and everyone's like, you're stupid. That's not the case. The problem is that Doomfist, if he's dealing with stuns or disables, he basically gets crushed on. But if you don't have those, he's extremely powerful. And this is a problem with specialists in Overwatch in general. If someone picks something you're weak against, it's very difficult to play against it. And the mark of a good Doomfist, or any good player, and this applies to all gaming, is how you deal with your weaknesses. And when something's made to deal with you, it's very difficult. So Doomfist is very strong, and he's not when you have counters in play. But here's the big but. They talked about Doomfist before, and I'll have to find the video. I think it was actually when Jeff Kaplan was talking to someone. Like it was on a stream. But he said, so back in the day, Doomfist, when he uppercutted you, you had no air control at all. And it lasted for 8 seconds. So if he uppercutted you, like you just couldn't do shit until you hit the ground. You had no control. So they're like, oh, we tried to remove it completely, Jeff said. And he goes, but it turned out it was very difficult for Doomfist to kill his target, because as soon as he would uppercut him, he's like, you just kind of like spin around him and the Doomfist couldn't find you and kill you. And it's really weird, because this admits, he one way or another, he said, Doomfist can't work if the enemy has the ability to deal with you. Right? If they have control, Doomfist just doesn't work. So that's why he has so much stun and disable. It's really weird to have a hero like that in a game. You're like, oh, if the enemy can fight back, I lose. But if they don't, I'll kill them. I'm like, yeah, that's true for fucking everyone. If no one shot Junkrat would be the most powerful hero in the game, because you can't shoot him. But I see him going to the tank pretty, like, they have to do some changes, obviously, and they talk about it here. It doesn't feel like a tank, because there's no, like, survivability button. That's an easy change, but he does fit into the tank role a lot better if you look at how his abilities are. Because right now he's an assassin, and either he gets in and kills everyone and doesn't get out, or he does and gets out, or he just jumps in and dies. Yeah. So cool to see what they do with that. Were ultimate generation rates lower in the live game? It felt like they were less ults in general, although this might be due to one less player and the 25% less ult charge from tanks. And Goodman says, the biggest change here is less ult gain from tanks. We haven't actually modified the ultimate cost outside of this change. Having ults happens less often was something we were targeting early on. Oh, I said it. Oh, remember when I was like, man, ults shouldn't happen as much? And everyone's like, no. And no, they shouldn't. And this tank change largely accomplishes this by itself. This is something that was super easy to iterate on, though, and I'm sure we'll be tweaking it throughout the game's development. So, great. Less ultimates. That's what this game needs. Less easy ways to win. Was there any feedback from the pros playing the playtest that you didn't expect? Is there any you are already planning on acting on? Finally, there's been a talk about Zarya's bubble cooldown and Overwatch 2 as it exists now. Has there been any talks of potential changes to this? So, he says, yes, we had a good mix of things we expected and things we didn't expect. Probably the biggest surprise for me was just how good they thought Sombra was in this iteration. We had been playtesting those changes for at least a few weeks, and while she felt strong, never felt like she was taking over the game's reign. Obviously, when you get her in the hands of pros with amazing game sense and coordination, it makes confirming kills a lot easier. We've since focused a bit on her numbers and tweaked her down a bit to keep her under control while still allowing her new kit to play well. And I think there's a good amount of iteration still to be done on Zarya. I think Josh already touched on some Zarya stuff in another thread, but I would definitely say that she is not set in stone. She was always going to be a bit tricky to tweak in 5v5 environment, and I'm sure she'll see some more changes. This makes sense. Yeah, they didn't think Sombra was going to be that strong. She turned out to be a lot stronger than that. Yeah. What's your philosophy on how tank buster heroes such as Reaper, Echo, Hanzo, and more should be approached in Overwatch 2? The role of tank buster obsolete when is there only one tank? Is the role of tank buster obsolete when there's only a role of one tank? It's really weird. So I actually thought about this exact thing, and I think I have it in my notes somewhere. OG Overwatch, you had anti-tank heroes, and that was to dissuade the enemy team from picking too many tanks. So if they pick 4 tanks, you just pick 2 or 3 tank-busting heroes, and they're dead. Now, we come along through roll queue, yada, yada, yada. No changes have been really done to change tank busters. Like, tank busters still kind of exist. Yeah, Storm Arrow, Echo, Reaper, just these heroes that destroy large targets. And you're like, wait a second, why do we have tank busting heroes anymore when we have to have 2 tanks? Tank busting hero, like anti-tank heroes, were just there in case, there was too many tanks and you picked them and you punished them for that. But now it's like, wait, tanks have to be in the game. Why is there a hero that shits on a part that you have to have? Right? That's like saying there's some weird hero that has anti-support, like they're really strong against supports, and you're like, yeah, that shouldn't exist. That doesn't feel right. And so I think it's important to have a concept of these high damage output heroes, which each have their own limitations and trade-offs. For most of these heroes, that's not the case. I know there is limitations and trade-offs, but most tank busting heroes are just fucking good. Reaper is amazing. He has a bunch of tools to navigate his long ranges to get to close range, and he is amazing on the ladder right now. Tracer, I would consider a tank buster. As soon as armor's off, she just shreds everyone. Storm Arrow, Hanzo, fucking busted as shit. And Echo, as we know, busted as shit. So, these heroes are still amazing, and this is why they shred other DPS heroes. Because get this, the amount of damage it takes to shred through a tank doesn't take as much to shred through a DPS hero. So I question the idea of a lot of these heroes just like, I question the fundamentals of how most of these heroes were designed and how they needed to be changed for the last 2 or 3 years. But they've taken away or lessened the Reaper's weakness over time. Yes. They've made him more of a generalist. 100% correct. The last change on Reaper is the best example of it. They lowered his damage, but increased his fall off. So he's more applicable at mid-range now. For what? The cost of short range. So they did that. Yeah. So he says, though not necessarily to fulfill the role of specifically tanks, taking out tanks and barriers. This is especially true with the format change to 1 tank per team in 5v5, because it can give players more options to respond to a variety of challenges they may be trying to overcome in game. More depth of team comps can lead to deeper gameplay. Correct. I like how he says this, but then he's like, yeah. More depth of team comps can lead to deeper gameplay. No shit, so make heroes more viable, you fucking dumbass. It's really upsetting when he says stuff like this, and then you look, you're like, oh, Junkrat Bastion, basically not picked ever in Overwatch League. So you're taking 2 heroes out of this depth of comp. Do they need to change something? Yes. If you look at any Dota 2 patch, anything that's not picked a lot, they buff. Anything that gets picked a lot, they nerf. They do this every, 3 to 6 months. The fact that they don't do it in Overwatch is insane to me. They should go to top 500, see who's picked, nerf them. Look, see who's not picked, buff them. They should just do that every season. We've taken some tuning steps to make abilities like Storm Arrows and Echo's Beam Laser less lethal against tanks, but still keep them powerful in other situations. Let's continue this thread. I just want to see. I mean, I doubt he said anything more. Yeah, just people saying shit. The change to 5v5 will, of course, require hero changes across the board, but I'm primarily interested in as how you're going to be looking at supports. With them having both one less tank to heal and one less tank to protect them, how are you tweaking supports in the new game? In broad strokes. So far, broadly speaking, we found that supports are often more safe in a 5v5 environment because there's one less tank trying to dive and take them out. Again, tanks are overpowered right now in Overwatch. If anyone disagrees, this is verbatim evidence against that. There are instances where this isn't true, like Sombra and her rework trying to assassinate them, or being sniped easier without a lot of barriers to hide behind, etc. In those situations, sometimes it's a matter of just trying to position more carefully, or maybe Sombra just being a bit too OP right now. Initially, we were worried that supports without mobility to escape might be weak in this environment, but so far we've actually seen Zen and Ana being very strong instead of weak, because of their nature of their offensive capabilities in a 5v5 environment. So it's the idea of supports being weak, not true. Supports are really strong in this game, by the way. Most supports can 3-shot a DPS hero, right? Ana does 70 damage a shot, 3 shots. Zen can easily headshot and takes out people often. Brig, obviously a little bit weaker, but you know what she gets. Lucio's fucking great. His entire role is about harassing people on the high ground and fucking with them. Harassing DPS. That's what Lucio does. Mercy. She's low offense, but by design. But yeah. How did the Bastion rework perform in these playtests compared to your expectations? He says, it's funny, I actually tried to throw him some buffs right before the build went out, but I missed the deadline slightly. He's been pretty tricky to tune with his rework, but it was great to see him play tested by these great players. I feel like his new design is solid, it's just a matter of getting his numbers into a good place now. Since the playtest, we've buffed him in a number of ways. He moves faster in sentry mode, his ult starts dropping faster, though the projectile moves slower so you can see it a bit more. His recon fire rate has been increased, and other buffs. The tricky thing is, though, when playing him, it can feel like you still get thrashed pretty hard because he's such a large hero. He is very easy to target and hit with everything, especially when he gets discorded. There's a lot we can tweak with him with that as well, though, such as increasing his passive or to offer more perceptible transform. We also have new turning knobs to help his sentry mode, since it now has a cooldown and duration associated with it. No shit. This is when I said sentry mode needed to have a goddamn duration. Fucking A. I get so pissed that half of my ideas work. I'm like, this is great. I said this. At the same time, I'm like, God damn it, I said this. Many pros involved in these matches described Zarya as weak in the tank lineup. Some of them even suggested that it felt like she was nerfed with the bubble cooldowns. How do you take that feedback? And he's like, we're keeping an eye on Zarya. Since internally the resounding feedback has been that Zarya is far in the other direction, and many think she is too strong and constantly high energy with her being able to bubble herself twice. There's a couple details that get overlooked with this new shared cooldown setup, and that duration of the barriers has been extended slightly. We started at 3 seconds, and it's gone down to 2.5. And the cooldown timer starts ticking immediately, unlike on live where the barrier has been destroyed or timeout first. So essentially, this is like a 2-second buff to Zarya's cooldowns right now. This is pretty big. So if the barrier isn't broken, your cooldown is coming up quicker than on live by some amount. The current internal cooldown is 9 seconds, and it's easy to tune that lower if she isn't performing well. At some point, it breaks into and too many of those barriers quickly, and it gets annoying to play against. The flexibility to bury yourself twice in succession or an ally twice is a powerful ability in itself. Using both barriers at exactly the same time is the worst case scenario for cooldown management, but is sometimes necessary. Part of the interesting gameplay that can be making that choice. Yeah, perfect. Like, people are like, oh, if you use both cooldowns right away, you're weak. Yeah. Yes. That's correct. If you use abilities and they don't work, you're weak. I'm not a very competitive player, but I'm curious to know if these playtests include any changes that were directly made in consideration of Overwatch 2's new heroes and how they might affect PvP. For instance, altering one of the current heroes in a way that compensates for a new counter they might have. No details, of course, more of a yes-no question. And he says, I can't give out any specific details, but the answer is yes. There aren't too many instances of this, but also in some cases, there are important balancing factors which haven't been changed yet in these playtest builds because of a new mechanic and interactions with unreleased or reworked heroes. So, everyone's that's saying, like, I'll just use Junkrat. I'm a Junkrat streamer. I'll use Junkrat as an example. People go, hey, Junkrat's weak. Look at all this shit. He's terrible. Well, maybe there's a new mechanic that says, like, Junkrat's really good. Like, I'll just throw something out there. So they'll talk about it later, but let's say, like, you receive less healing when you take damage. What if they said instead of less healing, they say, oh, explosive damage reduces your healing by 50%. All of a sudden, Junkrat's like, oh, don't get me wrong, Pharah's good, Soldier's good, but then you're, like, Junkrat, who only basically does explosion damage, all of a sudden, you're just like, oh, shit, okay, he's gonna be more viable because he provides this extra utility with his damage. So there could be some mechanics that they're just not showing us that could be really strong. And, you know, he kind of says that he actually calls it out. That there's some heroes that this is the case for. So we can't think too much on this, but there is something like that. How does the team feel about the time it took on average to get an ult in those games? So another ult one. And we already answered that question. With role pass, do the role passives really make sense from a balance point of view? Or are they causing issues? First of all, any more points of balance is fucking great from a design point of view. While it makes the game more complex, having more ways to twist and turn people is beautiful. Not just with ensuring unique hero identity, but also general game balance. This is so easy. This people are really dumb with game design. I've always thought that one of the things that was a balance point in the support roster was that Mercy and Zen have a passive self-heal, but can't heal themselves under fire. I mean, they can't now anyways. And technically, everyone does have some way of healing themselves. All supports, guys, by the way, all supports have some way of healing themselves. This is why Zen is 150 shields. Now that supports are able to heal themselves while under fire, are additionally getting a passive self-heal. Is this something you've considered? I guarantee you, this is just semantics, and a lot of people have actually been saying this. They're like, oh, but Mercy loses uniqueness because now her passive's everyone's passive. It's like, her passive is her passive plus the passive one. So she's basically healing twice as much. So when she's out of combat, when you're not getting hit, Mercy is an evasive healer. So if you're very good at evading, she heals fucking quick. I mean, I would assume she heals 3 to 5 HP a second, because right now I think it's 2. So if she gets up to 5 HP a second, if you miss her for a couple seconds, all of a sudden she's going to be getting her health back quick. Does it really make sense for a hero that slows you down May to also be passively move faster? What about heroes that already move faster? Are they now moving fast too? These are actually, the May one is, I don't want to say it's a stupid question. It's a valid question. It's fine. Like, that's the hero's identity, is to chase you down and slow you down. I can't think of any game where a hero that slows you down is purposely slower. Because then they just wouldn't catch someone, they just couldn't slow So far, the role pass has been great and helped quite a bit with both balance and hero design in general. This is something we've talked about quite a bit while working with passives. We still want Mercy and Zen to be better at healing themselves, but we're just raising the minimum self-healing bar from 0 to some small amount. As we're designing support heroes, this is a constant question we struggled with in the past, this role passive allows us more flexibility in designing future heroes. I will just say this: if this role passive existed before, I bet you, Baptiste wouldn't have his AoE heal to heal himself. I can almost guarantee that ability wouldn't exist in the game. Currently, the movement bonus that DPS heroes get is very small, but it can still be impactful in these kinds of situations you mentioned. Overwatch is a game that has an insane amount of mobility, so this change is somewhat a drop in the bucket compared to what heroes can do with their abilities. We're still very much in testing on these, and we'll see what sticks and what needs to be changed or removed. So, any other audio improvements? And they're like, no. No answer. Are you guys planning to do more of these? I really like seeing pro players test the game, and then being able to talk about it later definitely helped me understand what I was seeing in the gameplay. And they're like, it's valuable. We can't commit to any specific. So, are the devs content on how the tanks perform in the pro playtests? How they play in their tests, or is there a possibility for them to get more health? Does it feel like some tanks take damage too quickly? For example, does D.Va get DMAC too quickly, or does something feel like a tank peeks around the corner and gets instantly melted? This is essentially directed exactly at D.Va getting DMAC very quickly on the one pro match on New York. In which case, D.Va was horrendously out of position, flying away, so no defensive matrix. So she's a big hitbox, out of position, running through the enemy team with no defensive matrix. And he says, we're certainly still experimenting with many different ways to ensure that tanks are powerful and satisfying to play in this new format. On these experiments is seeing how far we can push tank base health up before the gameplay starts to break down. Some of the tank's results have been surprising. D.Va specifically has ended up much more relatively powerful with only an extra second of defense matrix, because that's super powerful. She has other changes as well, but that one did some heavy lifting. Roadhog as well has had several experimental buffs along the lines of more damage reduction, resetting hook cooldowns, or even being able to cleanse himself of things like anti-heal that were taken out because he ended up just being so impactful at a base level. Largely due to how valuable an early chain hook can be in 5v5. Yeah, so here's the thing. You're like, oh, let Hog get his hook reset after a kill. And then you're like, well, then there's just way too strong of a snowball. Right? You hook one person, I get my hook back. I hook a second person, fight's over at that point. There are still some problematic mechanics we're working to resolve, like Orb of Discord being nearly always on a tank, or Echo's duplicate choice coming down to being the best on the buffed up tanks. Yeah. Generally, we haven't found tanks to be getting blown up instantly unless they're hard overextending, what happened in the video, or weren't working with their team at all. In which case, they should be vulnerable there. But of course, we'll see how that holds up at the professional level. Yeah, 100%. I believe it was Super on D.Va in that video, and he was just playing like a dumbass. That's all there was. Long-time fan and someone who's studying game design. Also, this means shit, because a lot of shitty designers out there. Zarya's bubble cooldown absolutely gives a player more flexibility in the short term, but its implementation seems to be more punishing than in the current Overwatch. The current bubble, you can bubble you and an ally and get the cooldowns back around the same period, ready for another team fight. What I've seen in Overwatch 2, these cooldowns now stack, which means you have the short-term flexibility of either being greedy with both bubbles or giving two to teammates, or the classic approach of one for yourself and another for a teammate. This guy's saying, I'm studying game design, and then he's like, I'll just finish this. However, both at the same time seem severely more punishing now, as you have to wait double the time to get them back. I was wondering if you give some more insight on this change while the cooldowns were adjusted in this way. Like, someone goes, oh man, you have amazing flexibility in the short term, but it could be wrong in the long term. Thank you to most fucking game design mechanics in any game. Like, this is... If anyone plays an RTS, the whole point of a rush, or a timing attack, Oh man, Jeff, in StarCraft, I can put all my resources into attacking units, and I can attack them and kill them. But if I don't kill them, I lose. Don't you think that's bad design? You're like, that's the fucking game! Oh my god, that irritates me so bad. We already answered that question, but man, that's fucking A. Kid needs to go back to college for game design. He's a fucking dumbass. What is your planned direction for the design balance of support heroes for making sure they are still impactful? I don't know where this idea is that people are just like, supports aren't impactful now. It seems like you want to... Okay, so let's see. As you know already, but there's been a lot of people worried, myself included, about the direction based on balance changes we see in the videos. It seems like you want to move away from healing, considering the 25% healing reductions. You want to move away from healing. Like, oh, you reduced healing in combat? Does that mean you don't want healers anymore? And it's like, no. But you also nerfed the utility with the removal of Brig's Stun and cooldown increase of Ana's Sleep Dart. Some people have brought up that you maybe want supports to frag more, but why not? But why play a support over a DPS at this point? It's just very confusing what you're trying to do so. No, you're just being very extreme in your opinion. Also, Brick Shield Bash is just a placeholder for now, or it's increased damage with no other effect to the final product. Even in the 5v5 environment, supports are feeling very impactful in many ways. They actually are more impactful than Overwatch 1 currently. In 5v5, there is less damage going around to both teams. Coupled with the ability to focus heavily onto your single tank, it actually becomes easier for both teams to sustain longer fights. Which leads directly to the next question. There are two parts of the question, so let me break it down. The healing reduction was an attempt at combating the first question and answer here, where sometimes the fights can sustain for too long and it felt like it was too hard to confirm kills with one less player per team dealing damage. Most notably tanks, because tanks deal so much damage. That, and we were trying to make poke damage more meaningful. Wow. Wow, people. It's not like I've said this before. Right now, even in Overwatch 1, it can feel like shooting the enemy is doing nothing but feeding your enemy support's ultimate charge. That said, we already backed out of the specific change internally, but we still have similar goals where we're looking at other iterations. The ability, so basically, they just want like AoE to be in a roundabout way. This is for projectiles. There's projectiles that do AoE damage. Pharah, Junkrat, Helix Rocket. And the AoE damage doesn't do much, really. Even like if you did, Junkrat does 80 splash damage if you're like right next to the target you hit with primary. If you're half a meter away, you take like 30. It gets healed instant. So why even have it in the game? This would give more benefit to AoE. It would give rise to more strengths for more hero designs. If you start having heroes with more AoE, which agree or disagree with that, they need something that makes them stand out, and this would definitely help them. And this would be a fundamental mechanic that helps it. Right? It's not like we design a new hero with AoE, and this guy also applies a new debuff to healing. It's like, no. Let's just make a new mechanic, and this is just the way the game works, and then this hero just has a lot of AoE. That's a much cleaner way of doing it. So they're still going to do this, but not in the iteration that you saw. The utility nerfs to Brig's Stun and Ana's Sleep Dart are more response to trying to chill out crowd control effects in the game, and less about having them frag more. Ana's Sleep Dart is extremely strong, but also is a great playmaking tool that leads to some sweet highlights and counterplay opportunities. So it's not likely that we'll remove Ana's Sleep Dart. But other non-tank CCs we've been having a hard look at and trying to change and remove the CC component and buff it in other ways. Which leads to the next question. I think it wasn't super clear all the changes that Brig's Shield Bash has gone through just from the video. So here's what we did. It lost its sun. It can go through barriers now. It deals more damage once again. It now triggers Inspire. It travels much further, almost twice as far. It has a much reduced cooldown. She now has a mobility tool. Yeah. So this is the guy that did game design? No. Either way. So good to know that. So this is, when it came to the playtest run, were there any suggestion rules on what players should play? It seemed like players swapped heroes a lot. I wondered if they're doing it just to be curious, or was there like a try 3 heroes or swap every 5 minutes type deal? He says, we talked to our Overwatch League producer. We had 2 rounds of playtests for some players. 4 or 5 teams playtested with their own roster without us providing any rules or suggestions. The players were encouraged to try any role or hero they'd like with no restrictions. For the second round, the ones that we did record, we asked players to stick to their traditional Overwatch League roles and rotate through heroes, so the community could see what a wide range of heroes would look like when played at the highest level. There weren't any specific try through heroes rule, but we were asking them to generally switch around and try different combos. That's a nice thing to know. Nope. 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 I think there's only one more and it's really funny. Okay, I think there's a couple more. What was your thought process behind the 25% healing reduction? What we found from our internal playtesting is that generally support heroes have become the most impactful role by a wide margin, with overall less incoming damage on the field and with a reduction of a tank role. Fewer high health pool targets to try to keep up. This led to the average time to kill becoming much higher and many fights stalling out longer than we'd like. Not only healing output, but utilities like Mercy's Resurrect, On a Sleep, Dart, Bionic Grenades, and the Out Discard are more impactful in a 5v5 world. The general approach was to reduce the healing output by some amount. We don't really know what the amount is on an individual level. A little peek behind the scenes for game dev, the blanket passive heal reduction with the new concept of being in combat is a shortcut for us as designers to find an approximate value of what should be changed since to adjust the value from playtest to playtest. We only have to change that one number rather than edit every healing script value individually. The reason for the in-combat rule is mainly because we already know from the earlier tuning in Overwatch's history that when healing is too low, Mercy's and Lucio, it's annoying to try and heal large health pool targets between fights. We considered adding a bonus healing multiplier to the tank roll passive, but it also contributes to the issue of fights stalling out as mentioned above. It could still happen in some form. So yeah. That's pretty much, that's spot on. I think this is one thing when we get a peek behind the scenes that we don't really understand is that they're doing stuff so they don't have to change 70 different things. They just make one change so they can do it. And then if they notice, they're like, oh yeah, healing 25% feels really good. Let's do that to all heroes. Then they actually go and change shit. Nothing. I'd go over this. But is there something we can say about new heroes? Okay, this is the good question. Are you guys exhausted by all the rampant speculation based on an unfinished preview? Real talk, not even a little bit. Speculation and theory crafting is a result of an audience that cares deeply about the game we're making. We're stoked seeing all of you discussing the gameplay from the Overwatch League playtest. Man, I think this is tongue-in-cheek, because he's probably like, yeah, you guys are fucking dumb. I hate how you just take shit out of context. I'm really bad about it. Alright, I think that is all of it. I love this. This guy's like, this what's wrong with these heroes. You should do this. Here are my supposed recommendations. And they're just like, yeah, it's a good one. That's cool. What happened was the PR person came by and they're like, oh, that's a big post. Let's just say, yeah, that's cool. I'll tell someone about it. And let's not tell people about it. Okay. That looks to be it. Okay, so that's kind of, I'll stop the video here. Bam, YouTube video, stop, bam.